All right, so today we're going to talk about everyone's favorite subject, perspective. Just want to kind of go over some of the most basic things about perspective, and then we're going to do a little bit of an exercise with everything. So first off, the horizon line. This is basically the viewer's eye line. So, you've got this rectangle here, and that red line is the horizon. That's the view of, if you were looking at this, through this rectangle, that's where you would be standing, basically. And then the vanishing point is where all of these orthogonal lines are going toward. And it kind of looks like a sunburst, right? Everything is emanating from that, and it's all being, it's all going parallel to that point. The vanishing point is where everything, vanishes, basically. So these are just, the orthogonal lines are to help you keep everything in space, in check, when it's going back into perspective. So here's an example of one-point perspective using the same grid that I drew out in the previous image. So you're going to draw out a horizon line and then choose a vanishing point. And in some instances, the vanishing point can be out of the rectangle. Like, you could move the vanishing point out here even, where this red dot is now. You can move it out there. You can really put it anywhere, just as long as those lines are going to be coming from that. So I set up the vanishing point, I set up the horizon, and then I set up these orthogonal lines coming out. And then from there, I kind of that's my basis for how I drew my scene. So here's just kind of like a basic, person in the foreground, midground, and then background. And just trying to remember that the lines are going to be following, the buildings are going to be following these orthogonal lines. Here I've drawn it out, and now pretty much everyone's in perspective. You can see the buildings going back into space. They're getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and they're all conforming to these lines, right? And all the features on the buildings are conforming to those lines. One good thing to know, or one little trick I like to use when I'm putting characters into space in these scenes, is that using thicker lines on the characters in the foreground, and the characters and the objects in the background, the lines get thinner and thinner and thinner as you go back into space. And this is just a nice little trick to create more depth. It's one of the easiest tricks to create more depth, and it really works. So here's 2-point perspective. And when you're talking about points, you're really just talking about the vanishing point. That's all it is. So I went ahead and added another point over here. And again, see where my rectangle is, and then both of these vanishing points are now outside of the image. But I've got the orthogonal lines, and I know where the vanishing points are, so I now know how to guide what the buildings I'm drawing, and those two different points of perspective. Another trick that's nice for putting multiple characters into space, like the foreground, midground, and background, is kind of thinking about their eye line. So the blue line down here is representative of the viewer's eye line, or the character's eye line. So that character up front, say I drew that character first, you can kind of draw a line going back, an orthogonal line going back into space. And if the characters in the background are around the same height, then they're going to match up with that eye line. So you can put characters pretty easily back into space that way. And here I've noted that this one's a child because it's dipping below the eye line pretty heavily. And some of this stuff is just kind of guesswork and figuring that out. And back here, there's kind of a giant person because they're very high above that eye line, right? because obviously they would be way smaller, like maybe like that big, if they weren't super tall. Um, so it's really, depending on the character's height, you can kind of move it up and down. It's really up to you, but it's helpful to have this eye line going back to um, help you compose your scenes. I just wanted to talk about foreground, midground, and background interaction. Here's some examples that I'm from some comics. So it's really important to overlap objects when you are creating your scenes, especially if you're trying to create like a sense of place. And this is one by Madeline McGrain. So you notice these characters in the foreground here, and they're framing all of the action that's in the midground and the background. So foreground right here, and then we go into midground with these characters, and then you have the background, right? But all of these objects are overlapping each other. This overlaps the background stuff. This is overlapping everything in the midground, and that will really create a sense of space, and also just for compositional reasons and showing where, the artist is showing you where they want your, they're showing you where you want to go. They want, the composition to me is that everything is being placed here. All the emphasis is being placed right here in the center, or not in the center, but in this area here, which is, I guess, about 3/4, which is a pretty common compositional way of setting up panels. It's also important just to create, not only creating depth and like this nice sense of composition, but also, these characters look like they've been considered. They might be background characters, but, they're creating a sense of time and place. And, we talked about using reference last week, and this is just as important to have these specific things be there. And so here's a close-up shot by Gregory Benton, but you see all this overlap, this foreground here, and the characters are in the midground, and they're overlapping these background elements here. It's still like a tight shot, and there's a lot of this, black around them to frame them. So it also gives you kind of a sense of mood. There's all this darkness in this van or bus that they're in, and then the outside is very bright, and it's shining in on this main character, and that really sets up the scene. Here's some other examples. So you see here in the foreground, I mean, this one's nice because this overlaps her, and this is overlapping here. This is overlapping, and then this is overlapping. It kind of goes, the composition kind of draws you this way by all the things that are overlapping. That's David Mazzucchelli's master cartoonist. Same here with Jillian Tamaki. You've got this element in the foreground, and then the figure overlapping all this. Duncan Fegredo, this huge element in the front here, right? And it's separating the characters. This is overlapping everything, and then the characters are overlapping, all the trees and everything in the background. I love this setup by Megan Lands, where these characters are overlapping, and it's just going all the way back and then up into the sky. Same thing here, putting this character up front. That's one I use a lot, is putting the character up front, or a character, kind of a side profile view up front to kind of have this thing that frames the panel. And then there's this line leading you back to these characters. This is great. This is Sophie Goldstein. She does a lot of kind of like stacking in her work. So like, this character's up front, but they're stacked against the background. This character is stacking this, and then eventually, kind of like that Madeline McGrain panel, you see this as like the center point, a 3/4 view. By 3/4 view, I mean, if you cut this into fourths, 1, My measurements might be a little off here. Let's see how this works. Let's try that again. Yeah, it's about right. So 3/4, 1, 2, 3, and then there's the character or the center point is kind of there. Kind of same here with this crisp runner panel. This person's stacked in the front. This is the center point. This character is stacked here, and also all this wonderful use of black to frame these characters. They're getting, that's the focal point there. Again, stacking up this character here, 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 going back. Another Sophie Goldstein. All these people are just amazing cartoonists. Okay, so we're going to do a short exercise. This week we should still be working on our Day in the Life comics, but this will just be a short one where you're going to draw 2 panels with at least 2 characters. In panel 1, draw 2 characters in 1-point perspective, and then panel 2 should have 2 characters in 2-point perspective. But both panels should show foreground, midground, and background object interactions. And if there's any confusion on what I mean by that, just go back into the lesson and you can take a look at those examples. I guess stacking is the big word of today. Stack those characters, stack those objects. All right, cool.